Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we're going to be talking a lot about bioscience and life sciences and the business structure and what's going on in this amazing space in the biotech world. And this is the reason why I had this next guest on. He is the managing partner at Cardiff Advisory, a boutique investment bank, M&A, and strategic advisory firm focused exclusively on the healthcare and life sciences sectors. He's almost 30 years of experience in the biopharma, biotech, industries, and he's proven track record of leading and executing successful transactions. He is on the board of numerous public companies. He's also the board of director of other companies as well, and he's a big player in this industry, and that's the reason why we have him on. Please welcome my next guest, the one and only David H. Crean. How you doing today, David?
Awesome, Christian. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited to spend some time with you in this conversation and get to know one another and tell you, or at least try to provide value for your listeners.
Dude, I'm so excited about diving into this because, this is one of the things that a lot of family offices, because they have been focused so much on impact investing. And I was literally talking to a family office and he said, it's hard to raise capital for this industry. However, though, it is so impactful to be able to raise and facilitate this. But obviously, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I want to start with this question first. There was an amazing thing on your LinkedIn that you posted about Q3 snapshot. The IPO market shows fresh signs of improvement, but the biotech crunch continues to bite. Now, this is what you say. Hopefulness and cautious optimism are your takeaways. I'd love for you to explain.
So what's going on in the market? First of all, let's just all be real with one another. It's been a bloodbath out there. It's so difficult to raise money, especially in bioscience, in the life science industry, also in the tech industry. It's just been incredibly difficult, probably since the late second half of 2021. 2021 was like drunken sailors spending money. All this money's coming in, pouring in, and people were just putting it in. Valuations are shooting up, and then kind of reality set in. And now what you're seeing is calibration of and resetting of valuations. Limited partners and also venture are having it more difficult time to put money into it. And so what we're starting to see now, at least in 2023. It usually starts at the top at the public company or public markets stage. We're seeing increased follow-ons, which is good. That tends to also help release and draw out the IPOs. There's a number of companies, especially in the life science sector, which are coming in and sitting in the sort of the S1 queue. They're getting ready to go public. Now, why that's important, you have to have that sort of that venture investor mindset. That's how they get their return. So they've invested in portfolio companies, these VC-backed companies. They then will get their money back from either going public or selling through it like an M&A. And before that happens, the VCs can't funnel the money. They can't recirculate the money into additional portfolio companies. So that public market sentiment is super critical because it also drives the private capital market. Okay, so when we start seeing activity at the public market through increased follow-ons, increased IPOs, that'll help drive the private capital market infusion of cash into additional portfolio companies. So I'm encouraged with that. I don't think we're going to see a big influx or a big sort of public market IPO market probably until first half of 2024. But I'm encouraged, at least, to see there's activity going on. You have to sort of look at that and then look at what's going on with interest rates, with the Fed and their sort of their strategy trying to get inflation under control. What's going on in the Middle East right now is not helping. So there's sort of geopolitical tensions, whether it's China, Taiwan, Ukraine, Russia. Now what's going on with Israel and the Palestine situation is just horrible. Regardless of what side you believe or which side you support, it's just terrible. So all those things sort of go into what's going on in the market right now. So you're right. I'm cautiously optimistic.
I love it, and I love the analysis that you brought and kind of the picture as well that you painted. Now, I want to talk and pivot directly to the private markets, and I'm curious on this because You and I know the M&A has kind of slowed down. However, though, because the valuations holistically in the secondary and the private markets have drastically decreased. I mean, talking, a large, 80
Mhm.
cents on the dollar kind of decrease, that good is a good opportunity for some of these larger companies, public companies that you sit on the board of, to acquire really on pennies on the dollar. However, though, you want to make sure you're not catching a falling knife as well. So when you're on the board of these larger companies, what's that conversation look like to say, hey, we see this kind of arbitrage opportunities here. Do we want to take advantage of it, or are we kind of sitting on the sideline until we start seeing more of a better kind of green scale and up to the right trajectory? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great conversation to have with you. And one of those conversations you wish you were a fly on the wall at times, um, because you're right. M&A is an important component for not only for investors but also for companies, boards of directors to have that conversation to talk about. All right, do we have a growth strategy or what is our exit strategy? And if this is, for example, our exit strategy, and let's just say you're either a buyer or a seller, because those discussions are very, very different. But let's just say you're in a sort of on the sell side, and you're seeing M&A maybe starting to pick up or being seen as an option for the company. Then you have to talk about, all right, what is going on with valuation? Is this the right time? You know, there are depressions on the valuation that are going on right now. It really all started with this, from the 2021 timeframe, and now, there's so much pressure on valuations coming down, and they're frankly being recalibrated. But that is creating, as you mentioned, opportunities for buyers. They're seeing this, saying, wow, we can get this at a discount. If we looked at this thing a year and a half, 2 years ago, we would have had to basically overpay for it. So that has to be considered on the sell side. And then you have to also look at it like, do we do this in lieu of going out and trying to raise capital? And right now it's difficult, right? So then you go through this, what you call on the board discussion of strategic alternatives. Do we need to, if we can't raise money, what do we do to either extend the runway to bring more capital in, whether we look at partnering, divesting assets or certain areas of the business so we can have a core focus on something so we become more capitally efficient? Or do we just say, look, I want to do what's right for shareholders. Let's go ahead and consider selling the company. So that's from the sell side. And so those are great discussions because you have to talk about not only what's right for the company, but more importantly, what's right for the shareholders. What are we going to be able to provide to the shareholders in terms of return on their investment? So that's a significant issue. On the buy side, it's interesting because they're just licking their chops. Hey, we got cash on the balance sheet. We have nice reserves. Maybe there's some issues on growth or that we want to bolster our pipeline, our intellectual property, or we want to go into maybe different therapeutic areas or different areas of the business that we're not currently in. So it's super important. And you can say, wow, here's a whole list of targets that we can go after. Which one's the best one? Which one's going to drive ultimately the best, value for the company? And you can get, frankly, some real bargains rather than sitting around saying, the issue is if you sit around and wait, the market might change and these values are going to go up, and then sellers are going to say, I don't want to sell right now, and it's only going to get more expensive. So it's a great discussion on the board. It's just like you wish you were on the wall if you were not a part of that, just going, I want to learn from that, right? So it's excellent. I love it.
Well, it's so contextual because it's depending upon, like you mentioned, the cash reserves of these public companies, and there is going to, I think it's going to be, it's going to be interesting what happens in 18 months of heating up in that industry. But I want to ask you because I mean, you sit on the board of these, and you don't have to share like the name, et cetera. But I'd love to ask, regards to like the navigation, the way you guys think about this. And what I mean by this is there's like obviously a strategic kind of, hey, we're going to acquire this because they have that IP that we want to scale, or they're hitting this, amazing addressable market that we are not in, but we want to kind of pivot toward, or obviously upselling our current customers with other kind of features, et cetera. I'm just curious, when you guys are looking at this field and this arbitrage and these opportunities, just like we said, and taking some of these companies, acquiring them in that kind of format. How do you guys go about that decision making and saying, okay, hey, what would be the most strategic? We see all this opportunity. We can't eat all the apples. We got to find a few and eat those apples and so forth. And
Yeah.
obviously integrate that. And the integration of acquisition, that takes another 18, 24 months for a full integration of that as well. So I'd love to get your comments on that.
Yeah, for me, it comes down to classic portfolio management, and this is assuming obviously you have the cash. There's no constraints, and identifying what those targets are. But for me, it comes down to if we're really truly trying to look at an acquisition of a company and or a technology, um, you know, is it the right intellectual property? Is it a good fit synergistically with what we're currently doing? Are we looking to go deeper into our current markets, as you called it, or looking at expansion? So the idea of, do we go in a mile deep and an inch wide, or do we look at the other way? Exactly. So a lot larger, but still staying only an inch deep. So, are we in the right markets? Do we, what do our customers want? How does the product fit with what we're currently doing? And then finally deciding on that target or maybe a series of targets. Is there a good product or a company fit with what we're doing? Culture, huge part, right? People are an important component of any investment, whether you're going to buy them or you're going to write a check into them. Looking at culture, because ultimately when you get all this stuff, somebody's got to bring it in and integrate it, to your point, and that takes time. It's just not like, hey, I completed the deal on Friday, and oh, by the way, Monday we have this other company now. There's so much integration that has to occur prior to the deal being signed, as well as post deal integration, that you basically have to bring it in and make sure now it's part of your culture, and you're going to be putting on new elements, new components to the company. That's where a lot of M&A fails, unfortunately. It fails on the integration. So if you look at some of the deal stats, or you ask the CEO, hey, were you successful with that M&A transaction and what it did for your shareholders, your stakeholders, your employees? More times than not, 60, 70% will say, I didn't really like how it went, or that I felt it was successful. So that's a shame, right? And it shouldn't be like that.
100%. That's so interesting, actually, just to double click on that. I had a dinner with Mark Mobius, one of the investors and so forth. And his thesis and the way he thought about this is when he ever acquires or takes on a company, he really focuses on the culture first and making sure that there is this synergistic kind of situation, but also really just redeveloping that. And he's able to see amazing returns just for focusing, not anything external, product development, all that, but focusing just on the culture. I just thought that was very interesting. And that's just kind of, gravitates towards your point of how heavy and how important that is.
Yeah. So I share a similar sort of investment thesis as Mark. As a venture investor in the life science healthcare ecosystem, I make investments and I do it in this manner: people, technology, IP. If I can have great technology, great IP, but if I don't have a team, i.e. culture, the right people, leadership running it, you can guarantee it's most of the time it's going to fail. So I invest in that way: people, technology, IP. Very similar to what he's saying on the culture. That's a super huge component to any type of investment, or where you're going to spend your time, your energy, writing checks.
Well, we were just talking about this offline, so let's kind of dive into this, because, like you said, everybody's in this hashtag hustle culture, and sometimes there's just a lot of noise. And so, as investors, you want to listen, you want to have the grace to listen to these individuals, but you also want to make sure that you're filtering out the noise and the crap, basically, toward the curated deal flow. And I'm curious, you just mentioned culture is one of the big things, obviously tech as well, and then IP, which I love, just the simplicity of that. But if you could unpack that, because obviously you've been in this industry for many years, you've invested, and you probably have seen a lot of ups and downs in the market, so you can get a pattern of what you're really looking for, who's got the it factor, if you will. So could you just maybe share a little bit more about that? Like, what are you looking for, maybe when you are looking to deploy as an investor specifically in the venture world?
Yeah, first and foremost, because most of the people out there In terms of that framework of people, technology, IP, looking first at the people, the majority of people who are coming to the market and seeking out investments, it's their first time to the rodeo. It's like the first time CEO. And frankly, in my experience, 8 out of 10 are not truly CEOs, or they shouldn't be a CEO. I was listening to one of your previous podcasts where we were talking about that. It's like you're looking at them going, all right, you don't know how to raise capital. What the heck are you doing? We might need to come in and recruit a professional CEO to come in and raise capital to run this, who has the business acumen to do it. So a large majority of early stage investments, for example, come across my desk, and you're looking at the team going, there's not really a team here or a seasoned professional who can run the company. So it goes to the people aspect. Do you have the right people? Because you're going to write a check into them blindly. You don't know anything about them. They have no track record, no history. You're writing a check into them. You have to believe in them. Beyond that, and if you can get comfortable with the team and the people that they're recruiting in, a board of directors, advisors, what have you, then it comes down to, is the technology worthy of the investment? Is there enough conviction of a thesis that I can, place trust into, that I believe in? Is it the right market? Is there a differentiation there? Is it a large market? Is it just a niche market? So just having that better understanding, and then competitive differentiation of what somebody is trying to develop, whether it's technology or life sciences, biotechnology, medical device, pharmaceuticals, whatever. Is there enough of a conviction that there's something there that's truly unique and differentiated? And does it have IP on it? So I can protect my investment. And then lastly, frankly, is there a business model? How am I going to make money as an investor? What is that time frame? Is it going to be 3 years, 5 years, 7, 10? Typically in the life sciences, biosciences industry, those are long time frames. It's not like technology or some of the other areas. So you have to that's how I kind of work through it, Christian. People, technology, IP, and then there's some other frameworks, like what is the business model for this? And you got to the point is like the noise, sifting through the junk and trying to determine the quality. That's kind of the art and the science, right? That goes from years of experience, more than 30 for me, where you see a lot of junk out there, a lot of quote unquote noise. And you just know, based on experience and as well as your network, calling up your deep networks, your sphere of influences, key opinion leaders, like, hey, would you write a check into this? Yes or no? And if not, tell me why. What are the red flags, yellow flags? What do you see here as the opportunities? So utilizing your networks, your sphere of influence for those people that you've developed with great relationships within the ecosystem. That's what I typically do. It's not a standard protocol. You do it almost on a case by case basis, but in general, that's kind of how I'm approaching investments, as well as just working with CEOs and boards of directors.
That makes perfect sense. Now, in the umbrella or under the umbrella of life sciences itself, there's obviously micro verticals. I was talking to an investor, and he stays away from anything that needs FDA approval. So he focuses on others that can go to market pretty quickly. And then there's also one investor it was interested in his focus. He says, I focus on FDA post approval. So right when they get FDA approval, then that's when I deploy capital, because now they get and they go to market. So I just thought that was interesting. But obviously you have to have good deal flow, and you have to be at the right moment, the right time, etc. So my question is, when you're looking at life sciences specifically, are there certain verticals that you're like, hey, you know what, for the risk reward, I'm just not in it, but I'm going to focus on these verticals because obviously maybe that's where you came from, that's just what you're familiar with. I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that, a little bit how you're looking at that.
Yeah, that's awesome. My guess is that first person you were talking to is probably private equity, because typically private equity investors, risk averse, love cash flow. They love anything to do with sort of predictable cash flow. They don't like, in general, private equity doesn't like anything to do with FDA approvals or risk associated with regulatory environments. They don't like reimbursement, all that stuff. And that's fine. That's a great asset class because they can go in and professionalize an investment, a team, and make it more efficient, and frankly sell it for more than what they invest in. That's typically a private equity, and that's what it sounded like. Even on the standpoint of an investor wanting to come in post approval, looking more at they've gotten by the majority of risk, and they're now looking at just frankly it's commercialization risk. Do they have the right team in place to execute on their plans to bring in revenue, ultimately then drive earnings? I think that's great. It's just those two investors that you talked about are more risk averse than a lot of, for example, venture investment, which is high risk, high reward. It's all about risk. I mean, this is where they're going in, whether it's on the technology side or on the life science sides. I mean, there's just risk. There's product risk. There's team risk. I mean, a lot of these teams don't even really exist beyond two guys and a dog in the garage, right? So I particularly like the early stage stuff, getting in early. I don't mind the risk because I'm used to it. But that's a thesis that I'm comfortable with. Not everybody is comfortable with that, and so you have to understand your risk tolerance. For me, I have a great deal of domain expertise in the ecosystem and the swim lane that I'm in healthcare and life science. I'm okay with the risk, and so what I do to try and de-risk it is looking at the team, looking at the technology, the IP. I also get in there and help mentor. I believe mentoring and showing that leadership as an investor is super critical for these early stage companies. So getting in there, surrounding myself around them to try and de-risk it, to try and also build value, have value inflection points so that additional investors with subsequent tranches of capital financing will come in and will then start to really build a company, build value in a company. So that's how I've been approaching sort of life. But not everybody is like those first two investors you talked about. They will follow more of the risky stuff, but it depends on the asset class and it depends on the sort of the sector that you're in. But like I said, the two investors that you brought up, a lot of people like to sort of play in that because it's less risky, and I totally get it. And there's opportunity to make money and to drive impact and to really build value. But it's if you're going to get involved with the life science system ecosystem, it's certainly a different animal.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And what I find so fun about this is just like you said, is you see the long-term vision, and you obviously come in there with a holistic view and helping those founders as well. And what I think is interesting, you have more of that patient capital. And I think a lot of family offices have that a little bit more of that patient capital where they can deploy certain capital towards something and they can sit on it for 10, 15 years. That's fine, because guess what? They know the return is going to be beautiful and so forth. So just kind of putting that into context as well. Mm-hmm. When you're looking at some of these companies, specifically going to the tech, right? So whatever they're sitting on in regards to their market, their product, whatever that is, we talk about people, but specifically their tech and their IP, those kind of go together a little bit. When you're underwriting and doing due diligence, I would assume some of these are probably pre-rev. Some of them may have some top line revenue, maybe, but probably little. My question is, what are you looking for? Is it more of just saying, okay, I know this industry, I've been looking at this industry, XYZ, whatever it is, I see the addressable market, there's obviously a massive demand for it, and there's no big solution for it, this could really hit that? Or is it more of just saying, hey, this is very niche specific, however, though, the conversion rates are going to be amazing because it might just directly go to a specific disorder in the industry? It may be rare, but obviously it's going to be effective as well. So just the way you think about it, are you thinking about that larger markets? Or are you thinking about those dominating those smaller markets a little bit? In that
I look at both to answer just very plainly for you, but and this is just specific to me and my investment thesis. Others may have a different approach, but I don't like to look at me too types of products if it's just going to be incrementally better or there's something about it. For me, it has to fundamentally change what we're doing, whether it's a therapeutic or maybe there's a diagnostic, what have you. There has to be a clear competitive differentiation. It has to be unique, and it has to really stand out. Anything that's just incremental is not interesting to me. If it's not going to produce a return of, 3x cash on cash return, I won't look at it. I think it's not interesting enough. It might have an impact, or it might change maybe a paradigm, but is it going to be fundamentally, like, almost put the industry on its head? That's what I like to invest in. So if it's got to be competitively differentiated, and almost like fundamentally change the way we're doing things. And that's, how I like to look at investments on technology.
Okay. Let me also ask this, because in this industry, and this is again an industry that I'm not too familiar with, but I've got some buddies in it. I personally have not invested into this, but I'm trying to learn a little bit more about. That's one of the reasons why I have you on. But what I noticed with some of these companies, when they're trying to go to market, the hurdles that they face, because you have to get into these hospitals, and those are enterprise clients, and the sales cycle is like forever, but they are big and they are very possible. And then obviously there's other smaller like physicians that you could do. But I'm always just intrigued with when you're looking and when they're at that stage, right? And they're looking to go to market. What is a comfortable kind of go-to-market strategy? Again, it's probably contextual depending upon what product, et cetera. But if I would love if we just kind of talk a little bit about that, how you think about that specifically, because I see that those are some big hurdles that they have to face. And then also not only that, but you have to get the physician, the doctors all on board to obviously prescribe your medicine or whatever that may be. And I'm specifically talking about drugs, but there's other things as well that could be associated with getting into the pharmaceutical or hospital industries.
Yeah, great conversation. Go-to-market strategy is an important discussion to have with the CEOs and entrepreneurs. Many of them don't have, experience in that area. So you have to take a look at, benchmarks, like what has been done before, what have other companies done successfully in their go-to-market strategy. I find this very often, for example, in the medical device industry, where they go and they've gotten an approval from the FDA, or what you call a clearance on a medical device, and they've tested in maybe a cohort of patients to show that it's proof of concept. It's doing what it's saying it's going to do and what the label is going to say. But then their go-to-market strategy is, well, they haven't gone out and done any reimbursement studies to show that the price is supportable, or that who's going to pay for it. So there's this thing about it's safe. It might show some efficacy, but at what price, and who's going to reimburse it, right? Who's going to pay for it? And then it's where are you going to take this? What customer market, as you talked about, whether it's hospitals, physicians, what have you. Very few people have done and tried to understand that. So it's a point that I call from either health economics or pharmacoeconomics, if you're dealing with sort of pharmaceutical drugs, but just in general health economics. Like, what is that compelling case that you're going to take to a customer, a segment, and say, here's the health economics. This is why we're implementing it, or trying to implement it. Many people don't have that experience in doing that. Now, there's experts out there that you can bring on as, consulting and what have you. I'm not one of them, by the way, but I know a handful of them in my ecosystem. But go out there and make the case, so that you can go to the customer segment and try to sell them on this great product or technology that you've developed and that you've gotten regulatory approval from, and you've shown in maybe patient segments that it's doing something. But have that go-to-market strategy included in that sort of the health economics is a part of the go-to-market strategy. And in general, if they don't know what they're doing or how to do that, I generally tend to push them towards, well, I think it's time to either partner this out to a larger player who knows what they're doing and knows those markets, and let them do it. In return, you'll get, non-dilutive capital. Maybe there could be even a mergers and acquisition, an M&A scenario where they just buy you. So that's to me how you risk mitigate it. It's like, all right, you don't know what you're doing. You don't have that experience. Totally get it. You've done a great job up until now. Let's take a look at, identifying a large or larger strategic company who has done this before, and frankly, who really own those markets. That to me is a more viable strategy.
Oh, I see. So you're basically leveraging someone else's relationships and Rolodex. Maybe that might be a hire, or maybe that might be a joint venture in regards to acquisition, and you're kind of coming alongside them and saying, "Hey, as an investor or whatever," and rocking the boat. And that does make sense, because just like you mentioned, just kind of pivoting back what you just said, the value that you bring is amazing. Your Rolodex, the people that you know, the connections, the value that you have, the knowledge in your head, and that's the value that you bring to your founder. Really having that partnership. And some obviously are able to open up, doors to hospitals because they were working with them, et
Yeah,
cetera. They can obviously facilitate their go to market pretty quickly. That's kind of the way you're thinking about it. When you're looking as an investor, is that kind of also kind of the way you think about it? It's like, okay, hey, I may not have the connections, but maybe these other LPs have these connections. So when you know that, hey, this is more of a safer bet, or it mitigates the risk as an investor as well when you invest alongside them.
absolutely. You have to go through that scenario analysis of, look, are we going to do this on our own? We might not have the experience. Maybe it's kind of the buy or the build model, right? I could build it. I can go out and recruit people who have that experience. Oh, by the way, Christian, that's expensive. Okay. It's like, I try to tell these young biotechs, young emerging companies who are saying, oh, I want to be the next Amgen. I want to, here I am today. In 10 years, I want to take this to market. I want to build a sales force. I always say, well, good luck with that. Do you know how expensive it is to build a commercial infrastructure, sales and marketing and reimbursement? It's bloody expensive. Why not take a look at, for example, getting this up to a certain level and then just partnering it out or selling it? And that's typically where you see a lot of M&A, especially in the life science industry. After like phase 2, where they get a reasonable idea of what's going on in the clinic, they tend to get bought. Same idea here, in your scenario. Yeah, you have to go through it. It's like, do we want to invest in this? I need to know that, because that's ultimately the goal and the vision for the entrepreneur, the company, the CEO. Or do they want to just take a look at maybe doing it a little differently? Instead of building a commercial infrastructure and taking this to market in their go-to-market strategy, which is expensive to do, do we want to look at a different scenario of like, hey, just get this up to a certain level, and then we find a buyer for it. We'll get our return as investors, great, and it'll increase the probability of success on the go-to-market strategy, and then ultimately on revenue and earnings, the return to the investors. So that has to be always something to consider, that even at the board level, right? I mean, we're constantly thinking about that. You have to have that investor mindset when you're building companies. Like, what are they going to get in return? I always call it, you have to understand LP math. How are they going to make money? And a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs don't think about LP math. They just want to ask them to write checks. So you have to have that LP mindset.
Yeah, that makes sense, and aligned interests and so forth. And that's why I think it's so interesting to see the evolution of it. Like you said, I think almost like a baton race, where obviously you're giving the baton to the next individual that's able to scale and assist in that growth, et cetera. I want to ask you this. So I had an example where I was underwriting and doing due diligence on this company, and the co-founder, they were about $2-3 million top line, so it wasn't crazy or anything, but I was intrigued by it. And the thing is the founder had a portion of the equity, co-founder had a portion, but the co-founder is no longer working with the company.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of a red flag for me, because again, I don't know what the whole situation happened. I don't know exactly what happened. They said they were all on good terms and whatever, but that was, to me, I think that's one of the reasons why we decided not to invest, mainly because he did own, I think, 26%. I'm not going to say the name, but 26% of the company of equity, and he's no longer working there. I'm just curious with your take. Um, what is your perspective on that? When you see something in those dynamics that happen like that, where, like you mentioned, maybe that CEO isn't ready for the CEO role, or maybe there is kind of a split at the beginning when you're looking to, fund or, deploy capital toward that as an investor, and you see some of these things like, well, I'm not entirely sure what happened there. I'd like to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable writing a check. Plain and simple. I certainly, in my diligence, want to understand, like, all right, why is this co-founder not with them? What had happened? You're going to find that out in your diligence. It's very much akin, for me, not only the sort of the co-founder they're still sitting on the cap table, but they're not working there. What's going on, right? I see this almost an analogous to if I had a cap table that had insider investors into it, and now we're doing a subsequent round of capital financing, and the insiders, meaning current investors, don't want to put money into a subsequent round, another flag. I won't invest in it as a new investor. So if we don't have current investors, almost analogous to like a co-founder or a founder, sort of staying with the company, putting skin in the game, have an equity stake, and not being a part of it, there's a reason why, and it doesn't smell right. And as a new investor, I would not write a check in general, unless they can provide me a good answer, like, all right, maybe the co-founder is not working there, maybe they have health issues. Totally get it. Things that are outside of their control. But I think there's bigger issues there. Like, are there issues between the founders? They say there's nothing, but like, why aren't they there? Are they having disagreements on, strategy, vision, mission, execution? Is there something, just fundamentally wrong with it? No way, I wouldn't invest in it. But, it's not there could be good reasons why the co-founder's not there anymore. But those are the flags you need to identify quickly, because you don't want to be spending a lot of time on diligence on these things for months and months. You want to quickly find out and then move on, because it's lost opportunity, Christian, right? If you're spending time on this, you're not spending time on something else. So you have to look at it that way.
Yeah, in this circumstance, I'm not going to dive too much into it, but you're exactly right. Just unpacking those questions and so forth. And he also owned, and like I mentioned, 26. That was, to me, in my estimate, that was pretty hefty in regards to equity and not being still part of it. So that was very interesting. So I appreciate your perspective. And also, I love what you said there. If they're doing follow-on rounds where some of the investors are not, that is kind of a red flag. Of course, you have to unpack that a little bit further. Right. But obviously, if that is, then you're like, well, what's going on there? Why is everybody else writing checks, et cetera?
Yeah, that's absolutely a red flag. If an insider doesn't want to continue to put money in, there's a reason why. They might know something that you don't. And why should I, as a new investor, put skin in the game when they're not willing to put more skin in the game, or even at a pro rata, equity level? So you need to really unpack it and do your proper diligence.
Mm-hmm. David, I want to talk a little bit international now. Emerging markets. There are some interesting things. Obviously, everybody knows UAE has a lot of money over there deploying some interesting things, and the ESG, but also life sciences, biotech stuff. We also have Israel. Israel is mainly focused on national defense and cybersecurity kind of companies, which is very interesting. But also there are some. In Israel, I wouldn't call it emerging market per se, because it's pretty established and so forth. But my question, David, to you is, when you're looking at, maybe external, outside of the U.S. market, maybe just with the board seat you have as on the board of several public companies in regards to acquisition, is that something that you guys look at, or is it more of just say, hey, you know what, let's focus on, again, mitigating our risk. We see outsized opportunities here in the U.S. and just keep our money here and look at that kind of deal flow. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm agnostic of geography. I would say the majority of what I look at, and the lion's share is U.S. based, or at least North American based. But I go where, for example, where the ecosystems are strong, where the technology is really strong. Israel is a great technology and life science hub, for example. I also look at a lot of technology in China, Korea, and Japan, in Asia Pacific. So I'm agnostic myself to geography. It just happens to be that the U.S. is the lion's share of great technology, great IP. But there's some real great geographies for technology, especially in Europe, in the swim lanes and ecosystems that I operate in, whether that's in England, in the UK, France, Germany, Spain, Italy. There's some real great sectors there. And I don't mean, if I didn't say the country, I don't mean to denigrate anybody, but there's some real great spots out there. The Middle East has some really great technology. Israel in particular, it's crazy how much going on there. It's a wonderful ecosystem. It's going to be actually a shame how what's going on there right now politically and with all the turmoil, how that's going to impact things. I hope it doesn't, but I'm trying to be realistic as well. So
Yeah, God willing,
I think as an investor, or you're sitting on a board of a company, you have to look. You have to almost be geographically agnostic um, to see if it's going to help you or not.
So with that being said, I'm so glad you mentioned this because most of and I should say probably 70% of the family offices and other, investors that I talk with or speak with, they mostly spend a lot of their money and deploy a lot of their capital here in the US just because they say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, for the risk and the reward, it's just not worth it. When I write a check over there, I'm not entirely sure. And that could be internationally wherever, right? And it's not saying bad against the country or the nation. It's just more of, hey, I'm comfortable with here, tax code, all that fun stuff. And I understand, right? Simplicity. But also there are, like you said, I think a lot of opportunities. And so with that being said, obviously to bridge the gap, you probably need to work with someone that's very familiar with those industries, maybe culturally, maybe just the deal flow, the relationships. So do you work closely with maybe a venture capital that's running point guard in that area that says, hey, we could, got some deal flow, et cetera? Or is it more of a fund approach because it's kind of, you're not too familiar with that industry and that deal flow, et cetera? How do you go about thinking about those specifically in those kind of
Yeah,
regions you
I'll
mentioned?
try to bring on somebody who's kind of boots on the ground, who's familiar with the industry, who's familiar with the geography, the regulatory environment specific to that industry, rather than me trying to do business out of San Diego, California, and I'm looking either in Asia Pacific or in the Middle East or in Europe. You have to really truly understand the technology, the environment of which they operate in. So you can do that, through advisors, um, consultants, other people, whether it's funds, um, who are working in that space and just interacting with them. But look, I think we're in a team sport. That's what I like to call it. Maybe several years ago, they always thought, venture firms are competitive. At some level, they do because they all compete for the same crumbs on the table, or at least the good ones. But it's a team sport. So you have to incorporate into your due diligence and truly understand at the highest levels, and what is the risk associated with a particular investment. Family office, I see it all doing all the time. They're always bringing on advisors, experts to better understand what they're willing to write a check into, in particular in life science, because for family office, there's only about 18 to 20% of all family offices who, for example, are comfortable writing a check into life science companies. The majority put it into, real estate. It's predictable. They have a 5 or 6 year horizon. They want to put their money in, get an impact, and get a return. Many family offices don't really truly like the space of investing in life sciences. So, but the ones that I do are, they're hiring out a due diligence team that have domain expertise in the space, and that's what they should be doing. So it's really sort of irrespective of either the U.S. or elsewhere. They're bringing in due diligence teams to do that sort of work for them, so that they can truly understand the risk of why they're writing and why they're willing to write a check.
Which makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously hiring a subject matter expert in that area and in that region to be able to, really mitigate your underwriting due diligence. I want to ask specifically Asia Pacific, excuse me, and where you're looking at some of these. And I would imagine, and this is just more of an assumption, here in the U.S., I'm very somewhat familiar with the regulation and the FDA approval process, et cetera. And it is elongated. It's very, very frustrating, but also it's good for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Regulation. In these other regions, are there as much regulation? And is that one of the reasons also why you see a lot of momentum or excitement because you have a very systematic process? And again, that could be positive or negative. I'm not really talking about that. It's more of the concept of because there's less regulation, obviously that's able to move and go to market a lot quicker as well. So I'm curious, is that part of the reason why you see a lot of momentum in those regions?
Yeah, I think you're seeing some momentum in the regions for a number of things. One, I think there's a ton of money over there in Asia Pacific, in particular with China, and they're willing to and wanting to. Those investors are willing to, plunk some money down to bring companies and technology from Western Hemisphere over there because there's a market need. They're doing a lot of great stuff as well on the technology. There's a lot of innovation going on over there, but there's also just a ton of money looking to be deployed. So I think that's driving some of the momentum, and they know that a lot of Western Hemisphere companies are also seeking capital, and some of those, so that if the capital's over there and you have another side of Western Hemisphere, U.S., Europe, wanting to get access to capital, there's a tremendous sort of buyer-seller network there that are very motivated to do business together. Now, putting aside all the policy changes and issues between governments and commerce between the two, there's still a tremendous amount of interest to do business over there. On the regulatory side, each one of those countries has processes just like the Food and Drug Administration on drugs, devices, on biologics. And in particular, if you're going to do a study, for example, in Japan or in China, you have to do a local study. So you can do all this work, for example, in the U.S. and Europe. You've done all your work in Western Hemisphere patients, and now you're going to take it to Japan or China, for example. You have to do a local study because there might be ethnic differences, for example, in that patient population. Sometimes, like in particular in Japan, you'd have to do it in first generation Japanese, for example. They can't be a Japanese American. So there's local regulations in some of these, in some of these Asia Pacific countries they have to do work. Same thing with what they call the SFDA, and that's the Chinese regulatory authority. You have to do local studies to support its use and approval over there.
Okay, see, I didn't know that. So there obviously still is regulation, and that's not really the key factor. It's more just top of mind for a lot of the family offices and the wealthy individuals over there in that area.
Yeah.
But also, it's just amazing talent pool as well for that kind of ecosystem. So I appreciate kind of just reiterating, because again, I'm not too familiar with that area.
Right.
So I know you travel that way and obviously have deep connections in that region. So I'm glad you I love having conversations talking a little bit about international investing, because again, it's not top of mind for, and if they do, it's a lot of times they do the KKR, the BlackRock kind of big funds, and they have like Asia Pacific funds or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you like funds, or do you like more direct deals because you can control a little bit better?
I like funds as opposed to directly investing. Yeah, I like the spirit of it. I like the energy associated with that, rather than just doing a direct. Now I'll do both. But my directs are much smaller in scale. But I do like the fund approach, getting a team involved to help mitigate the risk, have them additional eyes on it, as opposed to just myself and my opinion. And it's an N of one, and hey, I'm just going to make a well, there's really not just an N of one. There's a wife involved too, right? So happy wife, happy life. Where are you putting money? But on the fund approach, I just like it. It's you can deploy more, you can get more people involved in your investment committee approach, in your diligence approach, and frankly, I think you can make a larger impact through the fund approach. So, but I'll do both, but I prefer the fund approach.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Just on a personal note, have you ever done any deals where it's like debt to equity? So obviously, like definitely if it's pre-rev, hey, I'm going to just, loan out debt for a relatively small portion for 2 years, but you also have the rights to obviously get, equity in that later on, if they obviously are able to, get proof of concept as well. Some I've noticed definitely in this kind of economy, in this market, I have noticed some are kind of gravitating toward that kind of focus. I just want to get your thoughts on that, or it's not really setting up the founder and the company in the right foundation. I just was curious on what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things. I've done the majority or many deals in that space as an investment banker, helping to try and bring capital in to the company through venture debt. So that's one model. But me as plunking down debt and having that turn into equity. The only one that's a very, very small, sort of illustrative, you can consider, for example, convertible debt, and that ultimately turns into equity. But that's a different situation. That's like small potatoes compared to what you're talking about is like, hey, going out and getting 5 or 10 on a loan, and then ultimately that is converted in. No, I don't do any of that stuff. As an investment banker, you're right. For you to do that, these people who loan out on the debt side, mezzanine debt, venture debt, they're typically wanting to see, a very strong cap table. For example, are some decent institutional investors, VCs, for example, are they on that cap table? Because they want to basically risk mitigate why they're going to be able to write as a capital provider, why they're willing to write a loan to these guys when they're pre-revenue. There's got to be some good investors on there who've done the diligence, who are willing to write checks, who can also serve maybe as a backstop to pay the principal and interest. So, but I don't generally get involved with that too much. I have as an investment banker and helping to either capital raise or help sell companies. Sometimes you got to bring in some decent venture debt, capital providers.
Yeah, I've just noticed, I shouldn't say like a big trend, but it's coming up a little bit more often than not when I'm talking to some individuals. So I'm always intrigued by kind of everybody's investing thesis on that specifically. David, I really appreciate you being on here, man. Just sharing your story and obviously the way you think about this whole industry, just from even the board of director position, and then also the paradigm of it as an investor, coming alongside these founders and helping them really scale up, but also really thinking about it holistically, the red flags and the green flags and the yellow flags throughout the whole process and the underwriting and due diligence. And I thought it was really cool how you mentioned, of course, people, tech, and IP, specifically in the way you think about it and structure it, and even getting down deep into each one of those kind of at a micro level. David, for those that want to just maybe reach out to you, I know you have an amazing podcast, other content as well out there. How do they reach out to you and be part of what you got going on, my man?
Yeah, you certainly can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can share that, Christian. You can go ahead and share my LinkedIn. I'm ever present on there. So my wife thinks I'm too present, but reach out to me at cardiffadvisory.com, my website, and look forward to continuing the dialogue, Christian. I hope we can do this again. Thank you very much for the invite, and it was great spending some time with you.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, man, just talking a lot about it. We'll have to have you on again because, of course, this whole industry could change in 6 months. And so obviously having someone that's on the forefront of it, actually, got his hands in the weeds of it. And it's just very exciting things that are happening. And I'm seeing a lot of money being deployed in this region, which is really, really fun. For those that are listening, to make it very simple, I'll put all of his links in the description below. So it just makes it very simple. You can reach out to him, connect with him on LinkedIn, as well as his website. That is my friend, the founder, as well as the managing partner at Cardiff Advisory, the one and only David H. Crean. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.